Before you see it, you hear it. That sound, so rare, so unlike anything else. But if you grew up in Northeast Ohio, you probably take it for granted. It's the sound of a reverse engine reverberating through air scoops bouncing off an envelope. It's to Akron what the roar of the L train is to Chicago or the clang of the trolley is to San Francisco. It's the sound of floating on air.
That's the unique thing. You know the sound, and I was just at a dinner Monday night. Man said his wife hears it. She has to go outside to look, even though we hear it all the time.
I'm like a kid who grew up here. I've lived here all my life, and when I was growing up in the 70s, I remember, you know, those brilliant summer days when you would hear off in the distance. You always hear it before you see it, that drone, steady drone, and it doesn't sound like any other craft in the sky. You know what it is, and so you spend the next 5 minutes with your head craned back, waiting for it, and it's just a huge thrill. Even, I mean, the first time you see it, and even after seeing it 100 times, it's just that huge thrill of such, you know, almost this surrealistic icon coming through the sky, and it looks so big. And, you know, it just, there's something really special about every time you see the blimp.
Because we're in Akron, Ohio, you see the blimp all the time. It's not as if you can get away from it. Even if you didn't want to think about it, it's there right in your face. If you go to a ball game, there it is. No matter what you do, if you're in this area.
Well, of course, being raised in Cuyahoga Falls, as a youngster, you know, we got to see the Akron and the Macon and the Graf Zeppelin, and so we were acquainted with airships early on, and it was always a great thrill to see these things, except especially the larger airships. They had 8 engines, and you could hear them. You could hear them coming. They were pretty loud. You get eight engines turning 16-foot props, and it's really impressive.
Lighter than air was man's first attempt to fly, first successful attempt to fly by manned balloon came in 1783. And flight by balloon was limited in direction to wherever the wind would blow.
No one really knew for lighter than air what to do. They actually sent up a rooster, a duck, and a chicken actually on the flight to see exactly what would happen because they weren't sure.
Akron got its first glimpse of lighter than air travel when Crazy Legs Johnson launched the first balloon at the Summit County Fair.
The reason they call him Crazy Legs Johnson because he himself and no one else really knew lighter than air that well. It was new to our area. When he was actually ready to go, he didn't have the ballast absolutely correct, and so he grabbed a hold of the balloon, and his legs were flailing around a little bit there, and that's why they call him Crazy Legs Johnson. He also, the wind caught it. They weren't actually sure exactly how much space they needed. They didn't have enough space. The balloon caught a tree, tore open. Crazy Legs Johnson went up to about 1,000 feet and then came down rather rapidly. He broke his leg, and so that kind of deterred lighter than air in our area for a little bit.
The next major effort was to try to make the balloon steerable. And from about the 1850s to 1900, various inventors tried to define and develop that process. And the most successful was Count Zeppelin, who developed a successful rigid airship in 1900. The whole idea of the passenger Zeppelins was to be a competition for the ocean liners. So the designers figured they had to match them in opulence and in features. So the airships were designed less as you would think of an airplane today, but more like an ocean liner. They included lounges, even with fake fireplaces and other amenities. So it was really the ultimate. It was the Concorde of its day because they were also much faster than any surface ship. They could cross the Atlantic in about 2.5 days compared to an ocean liner's 5-day journey.
Akron Daily News publisher Walter Wellman teamed up with an airplane mechanic, Melvin Vanneman, to make 2 attempts to fly a blimp to the North Pole in the early 1900s. By 1912, Vanneman had decided to try to fly a blimp across the Atlantic. He approached F.A. Seiberling, president of the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, to help him build a new blimp. I was impressed by Vanneman's enthusiasm and apparent ability when he first came into my office, Seiberling would later say. Seiberling not only supplied Vanneman with a new craft, he also gave it a name. The ship would be called the Akron. Seiberling would later write, "I wanted the name of Akron to be carried across the ocean on the first airship to make the flight that would tie together the 2 continents." On July 2, 1912, Vanneman and his crew waved to their wives and supporters, and the Akron left Atlantic City for Europe. But within minutes of taking off, something went wrong. The ship burst into flames, crashing into the ocean in front of horrified onlookers. Everyone aboard, including Melvin Vanneman, was killed. For Seiberling, the tragedy was too appalling to be realized. After that, he said, we did not have much heart for dirigible experiments for a long time. By 1925, airships were once again flying over Akron. The Pilgrim was the first of Goodyear's modern-day blimps. Built in 1924, the Pilgrim was the brainchild of Paul Weeks Litchfield, who had worked his way up from the shops in Goodyear to become the point man for lighter than air.
P.W. Litchfield is more interested in exactly what that technology applies. What can you get out of that? What are the accomplishments that need to be done to move forward, to do certain things? Now, in 1925, the Pilgrim was P.W. Litchfield's air yacht, he called it. And because he actually had so many flights, he actually forced them to give him an awful lot of flights to where he was convinced himself. He would not go out of his way to say something that he wasn't absolutely convinced of. And with all the flights that he had on the Pilgrim alone, he was convinced that it was, 1, safe, and number 2, that this is something that could be applied in a much greater realm.
Litchfield's air yacht was everywhere, from a landing on the rooftop of the old O'Neill's store in downtown Akron to carrying a certain Mr. Claus around, delivering presents to children all over the Akron area. Litchfield made plans to fill Akron's skies with blimps and zeppelins, making deliveries and ferrying passengers. Throughout the 1920s, blimps were the trendy way to publicize almost anything, whether it was dropping the latest Hollywood production from the skies above L.A. or dropping special editions of newspapers over the Empire State Building.
Now, I'm going to hook this on in here, and you take me up to about 1,500 feet. And wave to me when we got that altitude, and I'll cut loose, go off the dive and recover. See down there? There you go. Good, Bill. Yeah, you sure can fly that thing.
Litchfield was sure people would fly in airships, but what he needed now was a team of engineers to build something even bigger.
So, at the invitation of Litchfield, the Zeppelin Company's designer and stress analyst, Carl Arnstein, was invited to come to the United States to build a fleet of passenger airships.
In the fall of 1928, Goodyear won a contract to build 2 huge new airships for the Navy. But before they could build the ships, they needed to build a hangar.
There was some competition as to see what city would get the contract to build these, because to build an airship that's over 780 feet long, you first have to have a hangar in which to build them. And Akron was finally selected, and to build the airships, they had to build the hangar. And Arnstein had an idea, which was a patented building, an aerodynamically shaped airdock, which was built first from 1928 until 1929. In fact, it wasn't even finished when they began work on the airships inside.
In November 1928, one of Akron's defining structures began to take shape. The Goodyear airdock would become the world's largest building without interior supports. 22 stories high, 1,200 feet long, the airdock became a symbol of Akron's air power, a symbol that still stands today and continues to draw the interest of folks from all over the world.
When they get off the coach there, they have their cameras in hand, and they're clicking away, and they talk and like, do you remember? And they do remember. And it brings back fond memories to these folks. From Rosie the River, to the gentlemen who used to build the blimps, to the war effort. The building's pretty symbolic.
In 1931, a huge, rigid airship was christened the Akron.
They do things in a big way out here. This mammoth zeppelin dock in Akron, which we see from the air, houses the new queen of the skies. And everybody from miles around is coming to see the Navy's giant Zepp. There's standing room only inside as the crowd gazes on the silver sky battleship. There's Mrs. Hoover approaching the stand now. She's come to christen the ship, and the crowd gives her a big hand. It's quite an idea. The First Lady of the Land, naming the First Lady of the Skies.
I name thee Akron.
For a few short years, the huge airships would become a common sight in the Akron skies. As a child, Rendell Brown lived near the Akron airdock and would look up into the sky at night on occasion and see the shadow of one of these huge airships as it nearly blotted out the moon.
Now that was in the evening time after dark, flew over Goodyear Heights, and to hear the drone and the size of that monster up there, it was just extremely just awesome.
For P.W. Litchfield, the huge, rigid Navy airships would be just the beginning. He wanted to make Akron the worldwide hub of international travel. Litchfield would later write, "With a conservative New England background and hard-headed engineering training, I do not think anyone would write me off as a harebrained dreamer. I got into the field because I believed, and still believe, that the passenger-carrying airship is practical from a construction and operating standpoint and has great possibilities in international commerce and trade."
His scope of view was much greater than most people. He was far from being a dreamer. He really was a realistic person that believed by taking these different steps to make sure that things happened, such as starting out in 1925 just riding the Pilgrim, knowing that it is safe, that it's stable, even if they were to crash. You would have a certain amount of time, it wouldn't be that bad, you could repair it and you could go on. Now that's something that you can't say even today for airplanes or jets.
Even though he was an engineer and very rooted in engineeringly ideals, he was also a sailor. I mean, he grew up on the coast and he grew up sailing, and he was a dreamer in a lot of ways that you don't think of somebody like him, a very practical-minded, applied person might be, but he was. And I think in a lot of ways, airships and blimps especially captured both sides of him really well.
There she goes, clear of the mooring mast on her first venture into cloudland. The motors are merely idling now because her actual top speed is more than 80 miles an hour. The cruising radius of this aerial giant is 11,500 miles, a distance equal to halfway around the world. What a thrilling picture the great ship makes as she floats majestically through space. It's a sight no one will ever forget. Long may she cruise as a symbol of America's air power.
It had been just 20 years since Vanneman's Akron had perished in flames, but now Carl Arnstein, Paul Litchfield, and Goodyear were on the brink of an unparalleled expansion. America would soon look to blimps for more than passenger travel, and the days of the rigid airships would come to an abrupt end. On April 3, 1933, the second airship named for Akron crashed into the Atlantic. Only 3 crew members survived the crash in the chilly North Atlantic waters. In 1935, the second of Goodyear's rigid airships, the Macon, would crash in the Pacific, this time with just 2 fatalities. On May 6, 1937, the Hindenburg would end for good the dream of passenger travel by airship.
I think there's no doubt about it that the spectacle of the Hindenburg going up in flames was more or less seared into the minds and imaginations of most people. It was covered in a way that no other air disaster was covered.
That was sort of the last nail in the coffin for Litchfield's dream, and also, you know, others' dreams of airships having a future.
The day of the Zeppelin-style rigid airships were over. There was no more talk of passenger travel, no more dreams of Akron as an international travel hub. Then on December 7th, 1941, things changed again.
That since the unprovoked and dastardly attack on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war.
Once again, the Navy called on Goodyear, this time to build massive blimps to watch over America's fleet and coasts as we went to war. Goodyear geared up to build more airships than they ever had before, and Akronites like John Lilly went to war.
And then they said, do you want to go to Lakehurst, New Jersey, or Moffett Field, California? So this friend of mine and I, we wanted to go to California. And then I spent 3.5 years at Moffett. You couldn't pick a better bunch of guys to work with. They used to call us the Goodyear Navy, and they used to call our barracks the Akron Hotel.
Blimps became aerial battleships with a squadron of planes as part of their cargo. Pilots had to develop the ability to master the unique hook landing. And meanwhile, back in Akron, thousands of people went to work for Goodyear, building both Corsairs and airships for the Navy during the early 40s. Women who were later to be called Rosie the Riveter built thousands of airplanes and hundreds of blimps. At Goodyear, Carl Arnstein and P.W. Litchfield were still in command, and lighter-than aircraft had become big business, though perhaps not in the way Litchfield had hoped for. By 1942, Goodyear was churning out blimps with a production goal of 1 airship every 2 days. Goodyear Navy airships escorted nearly 90,000 sea vessels during the war and developed a reputation for never having an escorted ship sunk by enemy submarines. But in 1944, production was slowed, as the Navy decided there were enough blimps to protect the homeland. It would mark the beginning of the end of mass production of lighter-than aircraft. For a while after the war, Goodyear rented out its blimps as an advertising gimmick. And throughout the 1950s, blimps still played a role in defense as Cold War-era tensions increased. Blimps became flying platforms for huge radar antenna and towed sonar off the coast of Florida. Larry Carradine spent part of the 50s based in Key West as a Navy sonar operator.
It was very safe and very fun flying, in the sense that we flew at low altitudes, usually around 1,500 feet, but that was high enough for you to see a lot of the marine life in the ocean and the ocean floor itself in many areas. We flew over a lot of sunken ships. We flew over the Fort Jefferson, which was a Civil War prison, and it was really a lot of fun at that time. Of course, we had the luxury of not having to worry about somebody shooting at us.
In 1957, Carl Arnstein retired from Goodyear. Litchfield followed the next year, and less than 6 months after retiring, P.W. Litchfield died. Litchfield had spent nearly 60 years with Goodyear. He'd been there when Melvin Vanneman flew the first Akron, and he'd reveled in the successes of Arnstein and his 12 disciples. He was one of the last direct connections to the era of dreamers, a hard-headed engineer who dreamed of a future where we'd be floating on air. But Litchfield's dreams weren't forgotten. As a youngster, Ren Brown remembers meeting Litchfield and his introduction to blimps as part of Litchfield's Air Scout troop.
They took us to the Goodyear Hall tailor shop, and they tailor-made us blue uniforms that would put the Air Force uniforms, dress uniforms, to shame.
But then one day in 1962, as if to punctuate the end of an era, word came from the Navy. There would be no more orders for new airships.
Like losing a member of the family. Because that was, now, we still had the advertising airships out of Wingfoot Lake, but those big airships were just so impressive. It's like saying we're not going to have any more battleships to the Navy, which has happened, of course. And the same kind of an effect that you've lost a whole era has disappeared. And that was the feeling that most of us had at that time.
After nearly 35 years, the Goodyear airdock saw production of its last large airship. The Hindenburg had ended the era of rigid airships, and now the Navy airships would be gone too. But Akron wasn't done with airships. Soon the city would have a new relationship with blimps, and the entire world would be watching. Maybe there would be no more huge Navy blimps, but in 1958, Goodyear tried a new experiment. They put a TV camera in a blimp to get an aerial shot of a sporting event. It was an immediate sensation, even if the camera and equipment were so large and heavy that it was almost impossible to have anyone or anything else aboard.
Not only do we do television, but we do the night signs. We have the public service messages on it. Right now, we've got a lot of the public service messages are the Salvation Army and the Red Cross, and a very patriotic sign with the waving flag on the side. It's most people are really amazed by what we can do with our LED night sign.
By the 1980s, Goodyear would be operating 3 blimps covering most big events, complete with a new high-tech camera and microwave system that allowed TV directors to call the shots from the ground while the blimp floated above. Blimps served as Goodyear's most visible PR tool, but things were about to change for Goodyear and for Akron. By the 1980s, rubber companies were leaving Akron, and thousands were out of work. Soon, Goodyear found itself to be the target of a hostile takeover attempt by Sir James Goldsmith. Akron politicians and residents rallied behind Goodyear and behind the blimp.
But it really was one of the first points in time where this community dealt with this international business activity that had gone on for many years but didn't quite impact us until this first outsider offshore company, this stranger to them, living in a huge ship somewhere off some wonderful coast somewhere else in the world, started buying up stock and wondered how this American-owned company could suddenly be under attack. And I remember it was just a terrible shock to people.
Goodyear was the only large rubber company to stay put, but Goodyear Chairman Stanley Gault still had to make some tough choices. One was a careful re-examination of whether Goodyear ought to stay in the blimp business.
He closed a blimp site down in Texas, sold that property at a profit, brought a blimp back to Akron, renamed it the Spirit of Akron, and so he did streamline it somewhat, but he also rejuvenated it to a great extent too. And especially in Akron, that blimp coming back home to Akron, where we felt blimps really were identified, and being renamed Spirit of Akron, it really literally and figuratively buoyed the spirit of Akron, literally and figuratively. And so there is that kind of symbolic image of kind of rising and floating above it all after a period of almost devastation. That really, I think the blimps were somewhat of a symbol of Goodyear and Akron's resurgence in the 90s and into the new millennium.
Not only would Goodyear keep flying the blimp, but Akron would be home to a third airship named after the city. The Spirit of Akron brought Akron into the nation's living rooms each week as the blimp hovered over sporting events and provided a bird's-eye view of the action. Then, on October 28, 1999, the third airship, named for Akron, crashed. Just minutes out of the hangar at Wingfoot Lake in Portage County, the Spirit of Akron lost altitude and landed in neighboring trees. Within days, Goodyear announced that a new airship would be built to take its place. And new Goodyear chief Sam Jabara would not only okay the new Spirit of Goodyear blimp, but under his term, Goodyear's blimp fleet would go international with blimps over Central America and Europe.
I think it is a tremendous benefit for people to see the blimp. It's really a symbol of freedom, certainly of the free enterprise system and this wonderful corporation that's headquartered right here in our community. And I think when people see it across the world, they think of the United States. That's a symbol of Akron, we like to say, as well as a symbol of the United States.
Since F.A. Seiberling and Melvin Vanneman's first airship Akron, the city of Akron and airships named for Akron have been tied together by more than just a name.
Akron's one of those kind of in-between places to me that's not, it's not quite a famous city, but it's not nothing. And every city that fits that niche kind of has its little identity. Like, Green Bay's got its cheeseheads, and St. Louis has the Arch, and cities all across the country have the thing that they're known for, the postcard image. And Akron, I think, has the blimp more than anything else as that icon that identifies the city. Even though there are blimps in other towns, I think people associate it with Goodyear and they associate it with Akron because of that. And so it's, but it's, it's kind of an oddball icon to have as your calling card. The blimp is, I think they're beautiful and I think they're really fantastical, but they're also kind of weird. It's a weird thing. It seems like a throwback. It seems retro, like a 30s kind of huge, cumbersome balloon, but it's also, it's kind of poetic when it's floating up there in the clouds as well. So it's, to me, it's, I can't think of a better icon to have, and I couldn't think of anything else that could replace it. I'm pretty sure that everybody who's ever lived here has had the same dream, which is to get a blimp ride. That's become kind of one of the crown jewels of the Akron existence, is to have ridden on the blimp. And I know when those things go up, they don't sell them and they aren't really open to the public, but they will put them out as charity auction items. And they'll draw huge sums from people. And you'll get, a blimp ride for $6, and people will pay $1,000, $3,000, a huge amount for a ride. And as somebody who's ridden on it, it's pretty cool.
Ask anybody you meet around town about riding on the blimp, and you'll find that most people who have ridden on the blimp tell you the story of their ride with a glee that almost seems like gloating.
People at that time, like you say, in this area, didn't hardly ever ride in the blimp. So it was quite a thrill, and it's a beautiful sight, I'll tell you.
Akron's city photographer Bruce Ford has had plenty of chances to photograph the blimp, but when his chance came to take a ride, he was no different than anybody else.
And he called me about a week later out of the blue and thanked me for helping him. And he said, by the way, would you like to have a ride on the Goodyear blimp? And he said, not just you, though. I want your whole family to go. And I mean, it was all I could do but to, like, yell and scream. I'm saying, yeah, sure, And the first thing, I kind of blanked out because it was exciting for me, and I said, sure.
Longtime Akron Beacon-Journal writer and co-author of the book Wheels of Fortune, David Giffel says his first blimp ride gave him bragging rights in his family that he still abuses even to this day.
And it was on a really brilliant, bright winter day with snow on the ground last winter. And they took us up for quite a while, 2 or 3 hours. And just on that kind of day to be up there, it's a strange combination of, it feels and acts a little bit like a helicopter because you're hovering, but it sounds like an airplane, but it doesn't reflect either of those experiences. It's totally unique.
People who have never ridden on the blimp are easier to find than people who have, but they are just as enthusiastic.
What would I do to get a ride on the Goodyear blimp? I don't know. I would love to ride on the Goodyear blimp, so I'd probably do anything, really.
That's been one of my goals of mine. So actually, I'd run across the campus half naked, carrying banners supporting Goodyear. I would actually, I'd pretty much do anything to fly in the Goodyear blimp.
My uncle started the travel bureau at Goodyear Tire. Many years ago, he offered to get me on the blimp, and foolishly I turned it down. Since that time, I've actually sent a letter to Goodyear and requesting a ride on the blimp, and called them, and they put me on a waiting list, of course, and I didn't think it was that important at the time. Then since then, I realized that it's something that you'd really like to do, you know.
But it's not just a ride on the blimp that people fancy. Several groups meet regularly in the Northeast Ohio area to celebrate the city's lighter-than-air heritage. And the Lighter-Than-Air Society, formed in 1952, is building a large collection of artifacts and hopes to open a museum to the public soon.
The whole history of lighter-than-air has been able to find a niche in which cost is the driving factor.
But practicality and affordability aside, for anyone growing up in the Akron area, their first blimp sighting is a lasting memory.
Well, I grew up approximately a mile away from the former Goodyear Zeppelin air dock, and some of my first memories as a child are of laying in the grass, looking up, watching the Goodyear blimp fly overhead. And back then it just seemed like they were flying so low you could reach up and touch them. And that's a great memory to go back to, just to look up and see that blimp floating overhead.
And it was quite a compelling event to see something fly over your house that was a city block long and at only a few hundred feet in altitude. So these were very lasting impressions.
There's just a total sense of awe as you look up. I mean, they are so big, and as big as the air dock is, they're small inside the air dock, but they are still so big, and it gives you a really good feel for just how big the air dock is.
For Bill Cody, curator of the Lighter-Than-Air Society, it wasn't seeing the blimp in the air that got him hooked. It was a photograph of the USS Akron in the home of E.J. Thomas.
I was standing there staring at that photo in disbelief. No one had ever told me such things. Louise Thomas came up behind me and she asked me, well, what do you think of the picture? Do you like it? And being a young kid, I really didn't think of my response. I told her it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And so years later, in her will, she left me that picture. And so that's one of my greatest parts of my collection, and that helps me to carry on even today. I always think about Louise Thomas.
For people like Ren Brown and Jim Maloney, the blimp is simply part of the fabric of family life. Current pilot in charge of the Spirit of Goodyear, Jim Maloney, grew up around blimps.
Howard Hughes asked my dad to head up his airship called the Outlaw. And until that airship ran into a storm in Texas and everything, when he flew for Howard Hughes.
He wanted to fly an airship since he was 2, and after spending nearly 20 years in school and flight training, his chance finally came one day.
I kept hounding Goodyear until they finally, one day, it was Frank Hogan, who was manager of airship operations by that time, and I caught him early in the morning before he'd even known that he had an opening for a pilot's position. I had heard through the grapevine somebody was quitting, so I was in his office that morning before he got there and everything, sitting at his desk and everything, waiting for him. When he showed up and everything, I said, I want that job that you have open for a pilot. And he says, you don't want to fly the blimp. He says, with your education and your background. And I says, no, I really want to fly the blimp. And he says, okay. He says, well, I'm going to make you a deal. He says, I'm going to write down on a piece of paper. He says, where you have to go to work and how much I'm going to pay you. And he says, if you don't accept it, he says, you never ask for this job again. You have to understand, I've been hounding him. So what he does, he writes it on a piece of paper and folds it, hands it across his desk to me and everything, and I open it up, and Pompano Beach. That's not bad. You know, it's close to Miami. I'd as a young kid and everything, I'd kind of grown up in Miami, and also then he put a salary down there. And I said, wow, that's really low salary. But I said, okay, I'll take it. And so 19 years ago, I started flying, and I've been flying ever since and still love it.
For the girls in the Brown family, flying on the blimp became a pretty common thing.
One daughter particularly says, I just grew up figuring everybody knew all about blimps and got to ride in a blimp once in a while.
It's unique when they talk to friends, oh, my father did this, and it's a little different than what most people did.
Ren Brown still maintains friendships formed while he worked on blimps.
But I never lost contact with airships, this camaraderie that was there. These were all my friends, and I kept in touch with them all the time. And you think the mid-'70s is 25 years ago or better since I actually worked on airships. Yet I still know most of the people that are there. The young pilots that we trained in the 50s and 60s and flying, they've retired or they're in pilot in charge of an operation. It's still a unique thing in my life. I enjoy sharing that with special people.
It is unique to Akron, and it's one of Akron's real cherished heritages, if you will, that there will be airships flying around in this area.
I just love it. I just love the blimp and just grew up around it. That was just something, a goal that I wanted to accomplish, and I have accomplished that.
Why do people of all ages confess that they crane their necks looking skyward to catch just a glimpse of a blimp? How is it that people can tell you about the sound a blimp makes? Well, according to writer David Giffels, the blimp is something more than advertising, something more than just another aircraft. Giffels says the blimp is almost poetic.
I think what makes it poetic is that it is in no way whatsoever practical. Originally, blimps were designed with a purpose, but once those purposes disappeared, the blimps stayed. And so they are just, it's almost like they're just there to be that sort of dreamy, floating balloon up in the sky. I mean, obviously they have the advertising purpose. The only reason they're interesting in that context is because they're beautiful. They're something that you want to look at. And it's not like a truck with a logo on the side that's hauling a load. It's just there to be looked at.
It's like a magnet, draws you to it. You have to see it. You want to see it.
To me, when I see it, I'm proud of my hometown. It reminds me, and it doesn't matter if it's on the West Coast somewhere or even in Europe. I've happened to see the blimp in Europe, and it's an instant snapshot reminder of America, and that's what it says, I think, to a lot of people around the world.
Maybe part of it is that from the air, the blimp offers a view that no jet ever could, and a leisurely pace that is almost lost in our modern world of travel.
Well, you're cruising along slow enough that you can look out and sightsee, and you can fly over areas that you've seen thousands of times, and you'll find something new. And it's just a great feeling to, when you're taking passengers and everything, they're enjoying themselves, and I'm enjoying myself and everything. It's just a great way to make a living.
Here's this thing that flies over with just kind of a sort of a giant of sorts, flying machine that gives this great feeling for all of us, almost as if it's a real animal or a real person almost when they see this nice, friendly, big giant flying overhead. I think it gives you a real sense of community and of this city.
Akron and airships have been connected for a long time now. It's been nearly a century since the first airship named Akron first arose. And Akron and airships are so connected that maybe only here there could be a home for a lighter-than-air museum.
This area in particular, it's just rich in the history of lighter-than-air flight.
Over the past 100 years, airships named for Akron have arisen and then fallen, mirroring the prosperity of the city and helping to identify what Akron is to the rest of the nation.
I don't know. I think the thing that cities get identified for are the things that are unique. So like you think of like the Space Needle in Seattle, which is, there isn't anything else like that anywhere else in the country. Or the St. Louis Arch. I mean, it looks like something that doesn't look like anything else. And I guess that's why the blimp has become that symbol of Akron, because we have other things here that could easily be our icon, our symbol. I mean, you know, Zippy or something like that. But this is the one, and also because it's so nationally visible too. It's, I mean, it's really an ambassador, and they call them that at Goodyear. These are ambassadors in the sky, you know. And so it sort of carries the Akron name. And for so long there was a blimp with the name Spirit of Akron that would be broadcast across the country. And I think too, because it's got that complete uniqueness, it just sort of becomes a natural item that works its way into the texture of childhoods and so forth. So there are those little blimp erasers that kids in Akron always got in their Christmas stockings, and you go lots of offices and places around town and you see the big blow-up blimp that you can get for $5 at the World of Goodyear. And you know, it's on postcards, and there are toy blimps. It's just it's one of those things that it just looks playful. It looks like nothing else, and when you see it, I think you think blimp, you think Goodyear, and you think Akron.
Why do we stop and look when we hear that sound? Author George Larson ventured a guess in his blimp book. He said, "Blimps exist today primarily to make people happy, but blimps evoke more than mere pleasure. These great vessels have a unique allure. They induce a wild affection, and people who fall under their spell find themselves somehow wishing to embrace them. Wishing, perhaps, to be able just once to float on air."
You can order a copy of Floating on Air by calling 1-800-554-4549. Blimps have long been a part of the mystique of flying. Now you can own a visual history of these floating giants. Call now for your home video, just $19.95. Credit cards are encouraged when you call 1-800-554-4549.